at this stage there are urgent questions somebody would want to start a discussion with? Maybe I try to get the debate started. In the beginning, we heard a question about Bernard Newman's painting. What does this painting mean? Re-articulated into what does this painting know? And my question is, how can one answer this question? Or do we stay in the realm of posing questions, or can we attempt answering this question?
But now you are jumping back behind what you said already, because you said we need ongoing putting forward questions and not finding the answers too quickly.
I was quoting James Byrnes. I could also quote at this stage Johan Simons, a famous Belgian theatre maker, who once provoked me in public debate, and he said, "Go to hell with questions. It's time when one needs to take responsibility for finding an answer." So I'm trying that.
You know, I found it interesting that, I mean, this is from Peter de Bolle's book, Art Matters, where he finds this question, because he said that in front of his painting you could not just ask the obvious question, what does that painting mean, what does it say to us, and all these kinds of things. So he felt that there is behind this painting is the murmur of great art, and so we have somehow to invest into this painting a knowledge which we cannot just jump to conclusions about. And this is why he comes to put forward that question. And I found it intriguing, and I took it over, but we enlarged it by saying, what does art know and doesn't want to tell us directly. This is, of course, a kind of postponement of the answer, because then we have to navigate between different things. So in my text, I also try to, this is actually the work that I'm doing now, a book that I'm now working on, which calls Free and Indirect, where I try to, which is a figure of speech, a free indirect mode, which I try to develop as a thought figure, which needs to be patiently elaborated before it somehow, of course, produces also answers, but these answers are circumstantial. It's like in the Kleistian, I mean, I took this famous text of Kleist where he says the radio production of thoughts while speaking, I think is the English title. I'm much more familiar with it in German. So, and where he comes to an answer where he says it's not us who know, but circumstance or condition, what is it in English? Ein Zustand unserer. Es sind nicht wir, die wissen, sondern ein Zustand unserer. So it's a situation, a condition, a state of ours, and we have to try to get into those states. We cannot do that only willfully. We have to, I mean, let's say actively believe, but also reactively engage in intercourse with different things, materials, in order to reach these conditions where we maybe know. But this is, of course, no absolute knowledge. It's also scarcely temporal, but it is a knowledge or an answer, if you want to.
I think it has to do a lot with the somehow with the expectation, and it has to do for me also with what Sven was partly talking about, of making things readable, and in the sense that we assume that everything is knowable, and we have much more modes of accumulating knowledge and exchanging knowledge and continue developing it, but we have very little modes to deal with something that is unknown, and it is not waiting to be known.
And I think it is that, I mean, the fact that you address and that Eva addressed, I think that's in some way that's become a problem in let's say a lot of contemporary discourse surrounding art and a lot of events, etc. And we always have to have to make sure that there are interesting topics and that discussion can go on. But this kind of difficult side, this unreadable side, or the kind of this side that's resistant to readability, is a problem, I think, for a lot of. It's not easy. It's not easy to kind of integrate into discourse, and I think maybe as a part of certain transformations in the 1960s and 1970s with conceptual art and with rather fundamental change in sort of the discourse surrounding contemporary art and propelling contemporary art. I think this part of it that was maybe more prominent in certain forms of 19th century and early 20th century art has kind of sometimes becomes even more submerged than it was. It's kind of it becomes this difficult part of art. This kind of thing that sits there in the corner and no one really knows how to deal with it. This part of art that's really non-knowledge perhaps, or unreadable.
It's beyond words.
Well, I mean, to me,
Beyond what?
Beyond words. You
Well,
cannot
it's very
express
difficult to place it beyond words or in a pre-verbal condition, because this would also connect it. This would kind of always connect it to the need to express it, to its expressibility.
You can't isolate it.
And I think that I mean what Sven just described. I mean, what we have in the last decade since the 60s is this dominant model of mediation. I mean, which is very much dominating the whole idea of museum and so on. That everything has and can be mediated. And I think that as I understood Eva from what she talked about, is not about re-establishing this strange object that is there and no one is knowing what it is, but it is much more in a way changing the role, and it's not that someone will explain it to you. You have to do work if you want to share its knowledge. And this is...
You have to co-produce this knowledge with the art piece in question somehow. And if you go back to Kleist, because he has this dim idea, and then he engages with the material he's working, and he co-produces actually, whilst talking, what he's going to say. So if you think about an artist who is not just translating on a one-to-one scale, a concept or whatever, so there's always these Mehrwerte, these surpluses that are produced within this co-production. And you cannot reduce that to an intention or to a meaning.
And I think the role of mediation that Jan mentioned is really important. In my perception, I'm not an artist, but in my perception there's a culture in which artists have to define their practice or certain works in a few statements. And the danger, it becomes really dangerous when the statement and the work actually sort of
go apart.
No, when they become identical. Oh, okay. Practice and a statement, or the work and a statement, when in the end that's all that remains, and people exchange statements.
Talk about the disappointment in understanding.
I talk about sort of drastic, sort of shortcuts that are taken in understanding in order to facilitate mediation.
But do we still need to touch up on the issue of language? The question of knowledge production is a term that we so swiftly adopted in the field of art. It's kind of stigma that we don't really know how to resolve. Yet continue trying doing that.
I think the term knowledge production should be put in a box and then buried really deep.
Great idea. So the research for a new set of terms to deal with.
To me, there are a number of problems with it. The whole sort of productivist rhetoric that I see in it, so not a productivism of industrial goods as in revolutionary Russia in the 1920s, but a productivism of knowledge. And I really see this Fordist model in my mind, this kind of Chaplin style modern times assembly line with neatly packaged modules of knowledge passing by. And to me, that is really sort of also an image that is in part caused by this whole culture of mediation that Era mentioned, in which constantly knowledge has to be packaged and has to be hyped and marked and branded. And to me, the whole notion of production in this context is well, not only problematic, but it's also a disguise, I think, for what's actually happening a lot of the time, which is much closer, I think, to knowledge simulation. When I hear and read all kinds of things that are supposed to be about knowledge production, I often see knowledge simulation. It's this kind of strange Baudrillardian flip where production becomes simulation. We go from kind of the industrial to the post-industrial, from production to simulation. That's what happens in the art world a lot in microsection.
Jules,
maybe this isn't so much a question as a statement, but on the topic of language, I thought there was an interesting kind of connection in the presentations, because first Aaron's work on the building, this government building where you had all of the names of the region in all of the different languages. There you have a kind of, it's actually not really knowledge production so much as it is an excess of knowledge. I mean, the fact is that this region can have all of these different names in the various languages, but you're not necessarily creating new language, but you're presenting a kind of excess of knowledge, which would be understood by various people. And I was thinking about that in terms of what Sven was saying about the symptom and Omar Fast's work, that you have this kind of uncontrollable language, which then becomes something else. So maybe I would ask if the term excess, what you would think of that, or if that could be understood as a way of also kind of producing a different kind of knowledge, or this connection to language.
Is this addressed at me? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. As I said, somehow access is also a kind of a term that is somehow equivalent to understand. You can access something. It means you can do something with it. You can enter it, and.
But we're talking about access in terms of, instead of being excessive rather than being accessible.
Access.
Yeah, you're thinking of access in the sense of access to something, accessing something.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was talking about a different kind of access, you know.
And I didn't get it.
Access like E-X-E-X-C-E-S.
Oh, with E.
Yeah, access with E.
And what was the question again?
If you found it interesting to think about that piece or that idea in terms of excess, in other words, you could imagine that one form of knowledge presentation would be to have the name of this region in Flemish, right? Because that's the representative language. And I was interested in your piece in terms of what Sven said about Omar Fast, because to me that seems like an excess of knowledge. You present whatever it was, 120 different ways of saying the same thing.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, now I understand. Yes, indeed it could be. I mean, I was just, I thought it was incredible that this kind of unified, this one language could serve in this time, in our time, could serve to establish such an identity. And in a way, using all these languages, I know that perhaps many of these people who speak these languages will never pass by this building. But it's on one hand this image that this, I don't know if I would call it now knowledge, but I call it that this knowledge is there. It is per statistic there. And at the same time, for me was important that a very daily act of entering and exiting a building generates a change of language. So in a way, it's a kind of fictitious figure of the idea of every person who enters this building might be coming from a different background and speaking a different language. So yeah, there is some access in it.
Can I make a remark? Because I would like to be a little bit reluctant with using the word access, because it looks like that you privilege something that's going to be accessed in terms of it's held together by something, because otherwise it cannot be accessed with E-X-C-E-S-S, as I understood it. Access, yeah.
I think there's some misunderstanding going on.
Very symptomatic misunderstanding.
Between two words, access,
Act,
like
yeah, going
something
in,
you can,
access, yeah.
And access, what's a surplus? What's above the? Yeah, access.
Access is
I don't know.
Access is-
Do we know jail synonymous?
Access for all.
No, your question was about the access, to go, spilling. Access. Yeah, but okay, but then I can still continue my remark, because it means somehow that something should be produce the excess, in that sense, the surplus, which means you privilege something that is held together somehow, in a word, sort of, it's containing something, and then connecting to thinking about knowledge, the kind of privileged idea that knowledge is at first hand something that's structurized by holding things together, instead of thinking at the same time that perhaps already within that holding together, and the word economy refers to nomos not only as law but also to fence. You fence, you collect information, you keep it in a fence. You circumscribe things in knowledge. But you privilege when you speak in terms of the access.
I don't know, I guess I would say what I was thinking was the excess of, so like from class work, you have these kind of weird monologues where someone is actually playing the role of a historical individual, sort of talks about doing that and throws in all kinds of contemporary references to current events, their own life, whatever. That excess has to do with going beyond the boundaries that you're suggesting. I agree with you that they're there, but I think the subversive potential is kind of in the excess. In other words, by throwing in a conversation about, by mentioning a mobile phone when you're talking about being a colonial slave or whatever, I'm just making up an example, but that's a kind of jarring, it creates a break in the knowledge which is being suggested. So that's how I was thinking about it. I don't know if that's clear, but I agree with you. I think
Yeah,
the point is like breaking out of.
It needs something to be transgressed from.
Yeah,
To
sure.
privilege something that we should be very careful about, thinking in terms of knowledge.
Can someone define knowledge? Can you? I mean, because the image that I had with your question, because I heard the excess, but essentially the image was speaking in tongues. So not so much about the rational side of the project that you're describing, but in fact what you see as a visitor is something that's speaking in tongues. And my association then with that is the prophetic or the out of control and that kind of excess, you know. And for me, that for me can be knowledge. I mean, I can learn from that, from witnessing that kind of situation.
But it is kind of knowledge that's really different, of course, from knowledge as produced and reproduced within, say, certain scientific disciplines or scholarly disciplines, academic knowledge. It's obviously very different from that, and yet, to some extent, I feel art has modeled itself on this kind of academic knowledge production. For me, where it gets really interesting is indeed where it's a matter of speaking in tongues and of dubious knowledge, of kind of strange mixtures of non-knowledge and knowledge, of knowing and not knowing, of knowledge and its other, of knowledge and something that's non-identical to it. Yeah, that's where things get interesting to me, and sometimes maybe we don't get quite to that point nowadays.
Yes, can I, again, sorry, Eva, I found it interesting that you created an image about a painting that might know something, but you immediately apologized for it, like it's a metaphor or it's just a thought experiment. But in fact, there must be ways that you can imbue in the painting something that can know something that the artist might not know. And there are models. I mean, I'm very interested in Pierre Klosowski's talking about how, like a demonology, if you like, of an artwork, or the complicity of demons in what happens when one views and one produces a work of art. And he's basing that a lot on medieval thinking and Neoplatonic thinking. But it's very, I found it just very interesting that it's, someone cannot actually say or think that a painting might actually know something, to imbue it with a kind of consciousness. So again, it's sort of, for me, it's simply a sign of what we dare to actually, you know, like maybe everyone would think we're crazy if we start talking about it. But is that so?
I mean, I was actually not apologizing for that.
No.
Definitely
No,
not.
But I mean, maybe you need to bring in the people that were, because you're saying something that is quite radical in a sense, to think, okay, the artwork actually...
It was just not referring from pure subjectivation of the painting in question. So I just wanted to build up some kind of collaboration, or the free indirect speech between different participants that it's enact, that I try to enact. And also the whole question of, you know, the questioning of knowledge, of what it would be worth, what we pay for it. And there I go back, it's you have to ask yourself, what does these words do for you? I mean, what is it used for? And many times it's just, you know, reparations, and we try to enact some kind of exchange that goes via comparison. In doing so, you trace back the one to the other and so on, and you try to, of course, also to reduce what you cannot know, or what you cannot translate of what you maybe know but cannot, which is not beyond the reach of your knowledgeable formulations. And so I really, I mean, this is what intrigues me. I don't want to write about what I know already. This is totally useless. So it's always how to engage, how to choose to give in potential another one, so that you can create some kind of dynamics that takes you with it. So, and that produces a process. And in the end, of course, it's not, what is produced is not a knowledge, but maybe you could somehow engage into a parcours that makes some destinations, what is the word, that establishes some possibilities, but at the same time also avoids. That's why I insisted a bit on this, on my reference to Henry James, because I think he's totally intriguing in his novel writing, because very often he has a play of putting the same sentence with question mark as a question and the same sentence with a point as an answer. And in between you are just lost.
When I first saw a photograph of you, Eva and Egon, the first thought that came in my mind was these people are looking for meaning in a place where meaning can be found. And this is like a critique of mine. It's like, I thought your work was tautological, and the first video, for instance. And I think an artist, it should raise more questions than it answers. Yeah, it's like a critique. I don't have anything else to say.
Anyone wants to react? We have another question here.
I can understand Sven's criticism towards knowledge production and the term, but if you do a text on a piece of Jeff Wall, what is it that you do? Do you do descriptive text, or do you produce knowledge about the piece of jet wall?
I don't mind producing knowledge as long as I don't have to make a big song and dance about it. I mean, things can turn into lies by repeating them too much, and if there's a big celebration, oh, we're all important in the art world because we're producing knowledge, and in point of fact, in actual practice, it often doesn't amount to much, then I become somewhat, disenchanted with it. And but still, also the question has to be raised: okay, what kind of knowledge is it? And is it in the writing about the art? Is it in the art itself? How do these two relate to each other? The art production, if you will, and the writing. Of course, they're also interrelated, but there is a difference, for instance, I think, between things I write about Jeff Wall and maybe a really hardcore traditionalist art historian would write about Wall. So there are differences in discourse, differences in the kind of knowledge and perhaps even non-knowledge that's allowed to manifest itself in a text. I don't know how to go.
I'm very glad that this word knowledge is more nuanced, and I'm very, very happy about this contribution. I understand it's absolutely uninteresting to think of knowledge as a sort of product which has to be produced and can be given on. At the same time, so please remind this in mind, because I want to say something more ambivalent. At the same time, I am actually thinking on the background on which this is said. So with all criticism against this, what would be the alternative, and I think this is a danger, is to think of art as not producing knowledge, and then I am somehow catapulted in a romantic notion of a genius or an expert in some kind of craft with a hyper-natural talent or something like this. So I'm very ambiguous because I'm glad about these events. I'm glad that there is a consciousness arising that artists contribute to ways of thinking. And then I had this also the last time when I was here, and then I looked just etymologically because I'm very interested in language. I was looking about knowledge, and it means kneeling. It has a root going back to kneeling down. So if kneeling down to something, kneeling down as a Sanskrit root of this word, I feel this when I do, when I make art. When I work, let's say that making art sounds also so productive, but when I work, I kneel down, and in a way I try to know. If we keep a very differentiated and nuanced term or potential, as Eva suggested, not a meaning but a potential in this word, I'm actually grateful because I don't have much alternative.
Did you want to formulate the questions in your comment?
I was just thinking, I want to express myself, and I use the opportunity that my thoughts is expressed by last week, but I would like a comment. It's not in the form of a question, I'm sorry, but a comment would be great.
Your fear is, if I understand you correctly, that you might kind of make a U-turn and go back to some romantic conception of art in which art is just something sort of something beyond analysis altogether, and something that's some work of genius that can only be experienced emotionally, and that's it. That's kind of your concern. Yeah. I mean, obviously that's not something that I would suggest that we do that. My interest is precisely trying to demonstrate it with a few works of art. In those works of art who, as it were, use dubious knowledge to, on the one hand, or suggestions of knowledge, suggestions of analysis, to, on the one hand, extend knowledge maybe in excessive terms beyond what's customary in, say, an academic context, while at the same time also, producing a kind of dubious knowledge, let's put it that way, which on the one hand can be seen as a critique of academic forms of knowledge production, and on the other hand does extend knowledge production in a way. There I use the term again, but it's both an extension, maybe an excessive extension, and as such also a critique of limitations maybe inherent in academic disciplines. So I don't see it as a return to a romantic concept of art, even though I do think that everything that has been said today is fundamentally informed by the Romantic revolution in thinking about art around 1800. I think we're still in some ways within this paradigm, shifting occasionally more to a sort of a logocentric pole, and then more towards an irrationalist pole, but still within this romantic paradigm of art.
Yes, I have a question for Eva Meyer. I very much enjoyed your talk. Thank you very much. And while I was listening to you, I actually want to return again to Peter de Bolla's question, whatever. It's what does this painting know? And you're rephrasing it of what does painting know and does not want to tell us.
What does art know?
Sorry, what does art know and does not want to tell us directly? And I was thinking about the whole notion of art, kind of just keeping something behind, like the kind of art kind of just having, in some way, in our desire to read it or get to know it, like that it always leaves something behind it, and that it's so our encounter with it remains or has this kind of this logic of the seeker, that we and that our desire to know something more about it also kind of just drives us towards kind of this desire to pry open a painting, to really, or an artwork, really to get behind it or in it, which this desire of readability, or that Sven also talked about. And then you described this parcours in relation to other questions you answered, this kind of parcours that leads you into towards knowledge, or this being in this state of knowing. Sorry. I was just wondering whether this parcours, or how you describe this direction, would also kind of lead you toward, is there something that an artwork kind of just leaves behind that is embedded to us, whether there is also kind of this whole idea of knowledge as guilt perhaps, or even kind of a way of getting around it, in which kind of the notion of innocence or ignorance even can really play an important part.
I think there's a few questions that you put together here. On the one hand, I mean, I don't think that there is something behind that should be reached or that could be get at. So the construction that I put here, the text, which started with very ancient, antique, with Plato's expression of the poets from the city of the Republic, where we had this dissociation between the poetic act and what was later then formulated as rational thinking, and at the same time the assumption that the poetic act would have some kind of peculiar and even dangerous sort of knowledge. And then I jumped to this, very briefly to Peter de Bolle and his question, what does this painting know? Which is then tried to put into, alert by, does not want us directly. And at the same time, I not apologize, but did not want to invest art with our concept of subjectivity. The problem is always that we are entering, the moment we talk, we are entering very diverse economies, and it's impossible to really refrain from it, but we have to try to not get fully trapped into them. And that's what I try to describe as some kind of parkour. At the same time, what I think is not arrived at in the end is a knowledge, but we somehow invest ourselves and into ourselves some kind of what I call informative quality. And I think maybe I try to somehow substitute the term of knowledge by refraining to enter this economy of exchange, which is established by it, between the not known and the knowing, to arrive at this attitude or this process, which I would call of having an informative quality. So, what would you say to that?
I would immediately raise the question whether you could what the difference would be then between information and knowledge.
An informative quality is always something that is established. This is of an informative quality. If, for example, just to talk of personal experiences for a change, if you would, for example, read a book like Henry James, who has this, and there's a dialogue which has the same sentence as a question, as an answer, then you're somehow just thrown back to your own assumptions as being fed by bits and pieces of a story, of some narration that would put sense into, would then establish itself as some kind of action or so on. If this is not presented to you, but at the same time, if the whole context is intriguingly enough that you are not just putting it aside as being, totally nonsensical or stupid or uninteresting, then you have to find a way to deal with this in-between knowledge situation. And this is an active work that is required from you, and this is what you try to name some kind of co-production that you do with the material. And then use this Kleistian approach, which is, of course, in a way more descriptive, methodologically, but at the same time, of course, it's also limited because it is an engagement with the material that you're dealing with while thinking, which is language. And at the same time, he also refers to the initial question, the situation is also that he is with his sister, who is somehow intervening, so there's different kinds of powers that somehow drive and produce this compulsive situation, and which I think is interesting. And the final representational mode that he finds is that he says it's a state of ours that knows, but I would always call this state of ours not a certain knowledge, but an informative quality that we arrive at while putting ourselves into these situations.
Are there any more questions in the room that you feel are urgent to ask at this point? Panelists at the table, do you want to ask anything to each other at this point?
I think my stomach wants food.
I consider this quite a serious challenge.
Not a question, I just said my stomach wants food.
That was our knowledge production.
Yeah.
I'd like to...
Eerst komt als fressen, dan het wissen.
I'd like to thank our guests. I'd like to thank Bina Choi, Assistant Curator at BAC, and Jill Winder, Editor, working at BAC, who prepared the entire series. I'd like to invite you first for a drink, next door. And around 7 o'clock they deliver food, a light dinner. We would like to invite you all to join. In hope that you join us for the evening program, we going to see a performance by Claire Harvey and registration and documentation of a performance by a choreographer, Ivana Müller, on the subject of knowledge production. Thank you very much for coming, for participation and talk, and enjoy the drink.